Welcome to our episode of Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down. Sponsored by Bible Interact and hosted by Dr. George Sparks. Today's special guest is experienced field archaeologist Dr. David E. Graves. Now let's explore the field of archaeology in today's episode.
Well, welcome, everybody. This is Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down, sponsored by Bible Interact. Today, I got my special guest, Dr. David Graves, who received his PhD from Aberdeen University in Scotland. Also, over 30 years of active excavations in Israel and in Jordan. In Israel, we have the biblical it's Shiloh. Everybody knows where Shiloh is at. And then the Temple Mount Sifting program. And then we have Tel El MacArthur as a biblical candidate for I, that's spelled A-I. And then on the Jordanian side, Tel El Hammam as a candidate for biblical Sodom in the Sodom and Gomorrah epic in the biblical narrative. So David, how you doing today?
Doing good, George. Good to be with you.
Good to see you. Oh, today's topic, Ashurbanipal, and then something to do with the lion hunt. They were hunting lions. That's a bit odd. I never seen but he's up in Mesopotamia. I don't think I ever seen a lion in Israel, at least not yet. Although we do read about it in the biblical narrative. We read about lions and bears.
Sure. Yes. They've basically gone extinct because of the population, but in antiquity, they were very plentiful there. So we'll be talking about that a little bit and
Okay.
significance of that. Going to start the PowerPoint up here, but go ahead.
Okay, while you're doing that, I forgot to also tell people that you do have a selection of books, around 40 books that you have published, and you have 3 coloring books that you have online through, I think it was Amazon and Christian
Amazon,
Media,
yes.
Electric Christian Media, and they would be great Christmas gifts. And also, they're coloring books, but they're educational, so you can sneak an education in while the kids are actually coloring in his book. So with that in mind, I see we got the PowerPoint up and running, Ashurbanipal and the lion hunt. I'm ready when you're ready.
Okay, then, George, we'll get started here. We're going to be talking about Ashurbanipal and some of the archaeological artifacts that surround him. So we have a relief of him there, and then we have one of the prisms that talks about him here. He describes his exploits on the prism. And again, like all of the others, it's material that can be found in my Archaeology of Biblical People. Scan the QR code and it'll take you to Amazon where it's located. And it's got the receipts in it. So all the footnotes are there for anyone who wants to do extra work and study and research. Well, George mentioned my coloring books. Here's the 3 that I have out on Amazon at the moment. A friend of mine the other day that I dug with at Shiloh bought one for his daughter for Christmas and gave it to her early and sent me a photograph of her holding it. And she was all excited and wanted him to read for her bedtime story, the turn to the Isaiah scroll, and want him to read the Hebrew. So he had to laugh about that. She picked the Hebrew that he had to read for the, but she was going to color it and share it with some of her friends as well. They're going to have a coloring party. So makes a good Christmas present. So those are the 3. There's about, I think there's 30 plates in each of them. So there's lots of coloring plates for the little ones to color. Well, now we come to the last of the Neo-Syrian kings in the family tree that are mentioned in Scripture. We've looked at Tiglath-Pileser III, Shalmaneser V, Sargon II, Sennacherib, Esarhaddon, and now we're going to talk about Ashurbanipal. And these are all mentioned in Scripture by name. Now, Ashurbanipal is not mentioned clearly. The name is a little bit obscured, but I'll show that a little bit later. And boy, I think, and other scholars believe that it's Ashurbanipal. This is the stele of Esarhaddon, and his picture here is on the front of it, but on the side, we have a gentleman that's there, and that's Ashurbanipal. That's his son. So he put his son on the side of it. So we do have a picture of what he looked like. And this is another relief of him with the, I call it the pointy hat, similar to the Turkish hat that's worn in Turkey today, but here it's a rounded hat that he was wearing. So here are all of the kings that are mentioned, the 6 Assyrian kings that we've looked at over the last few weeks, named in the Bible. And here we have Ashurbanipal, 668 to 631 BC, with this picture here on the side. This relief shows Ashurbanipal and the queen relaxing with the fans behind them, cooling them off, and they're having a drink of something, likely wine, in the garden party image. See a necklace here on the couch that has been taken off and just sort of hanging there, and gets you a real picture of what it was like as you look back into their lives. As I mentioned, that's Ashurbanipal there on the side of the victory stele of Esarhaddon. The 10-sided cylinder was discovered by this gentleman here, Rassam, and it is called the Rassam cylinder. And he worked as we would call it like a square supervisor today, but he was in charge of doing some of the excavations. He worked with Henry Layard, I believe. It's the most complete description of the chronicles of his reign, including description of the campaign of Egypt, discovered in Nineveh, and dates to 643 BC. It describes the designated as the crown prince by Esarhaddon on May 672 BC. He became the king, ascended to the throne in 669 in Nineveh. Military campaigns and conquests, the expansion operations. He continued campaigns against Egypt and a whole bunch of other places, and including Elam and also the Arabs in Babylon. He faced revolt from his twin brother. He was the king of Babylonia. So he revolted against him. They had a fight. Sometimes that happens. Here's a picture of him fighting the Arabs that are on camels with their bows. Some have suggested that camels were domesticated for quite a bit later than this time period, but here we have a relief of them on it, so that was sort of nonsense. Key victories: they supported the garrisons in strategic cities, defeated the Elamites, and cut off the Babylonians from allied tribes. Babylon fell after a 2-year siege, and then his brother committed suicide, and then the invasion of Elam in 640 BC was a successful invasion, sacking Susa, exiled inhabitants to Samaria, and we read about this in Ezra chapter 4 verse 10 in the Bible. And the rest of the nations whom the great and noble Assurbanipal, and we believe that's Ashurbanipal. You have to remember, this was a spoken language, and so they wrote things down as they heard them. So you can sort of hear it when you say it. Ashurbanipal, again with their accents and so forth. And it reads in Ezra that he deported and settled in the cities of Samaria and in the rest of the provinces beyond the river. And we know that Ashurbanipal did that. We know it's at this time of history. And so it's only logical that that's who was doing it. There's an obscurity post in 639 BC. Few records exist about those particular years. Retired to Haran. It's up in the northern area. Succession: he left his son to govern Assyria and to confront the Chaldean dynasty. So his sons were put in charge. And then he had some declining authority. The outlying vassal states, including Egypt and Judah, began asserting their independence and sort of revolting. His power started to wane. And then we have the significance of Manasseh, king of Judah, that rises up, and this is where it intersects the biblical record. He aimed to defeat the Nubian Tirhakah, and there was a temporary setback. Tirhakah retreated. Ashurbanipal restored the Assyrian governors in the Delta region in Egypt, and then he received tribute from 22 kings, including Manasseh of Judah, and Baal of Tyre, and other regional leaders. So Ashurbanipal records that Manasseh, king of Judah, he mentions him by name, was among the kings who supported his military efforts against Egypt in 667 BC and who paid tribute to him. So this particular stela or prism here on the right mentions Manasseh, king of Judah, and then we have the intersection of the biblical record. And this is found in the Louvre, that particular prism. And then there was a retaliatory campaign, punitive forces against Tirhakah, his successor, the Egyptian pharaoh Dandamain, the sack of Thebes described in Nehemiah chapter 3, verses 8 to 10. Nehemiah says, and you, better than Thebes that sat by the Nile with water around her, her rampart a sea and water her wall. Cush was her strength, Egypt too, and that without limit. Put and Libyans were her helpers. Verse 10 says, yet she became an exile. She went into captivity. Her infants were dashed in pieces. For the head of every street, for her honor, men lots were cast, and all her great men were bound in chains. We saw that last week, how they would carry them off, putting a ring through their nose. His father would carry the captives away, pulling them with their fishhooks in their jaw. It shows Egypt's unreliability then as an ally. It's referred to as a bruised reed in 2 Kings chapter 18:21. Behold, you are trusting now in Egypt, that broken reed of a staff, which will pierce the hand of any man who leans on it. Such is Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to all who trust in him. So Kings talks about Egypt in a fairly derogatory fashion, not to be trusted. And then it isolated Judah becomes through military actions against the neighboring states. The culmination of power, his reign, Ashurbanipal, marked the height of the Assyrian military power before a subsequent decline, and they sort of fall apart, and then it leads into the rise of the Babylonians. So that's sort of the history behind Ashurbanipal. And something that's not often known or talked about is that Ashurbanipal is believed to have read cuneiform himself, and not just relying on his scribes. And this is the Nineveh Library, as it's now displayed in the British Museum. All the tablets that he had in his library, there were some 6,000 of them, many of which he could read himself. So that was kind of interesting. Many of the other leaders, of course, of the time would rely on their scribes to read and translate and write. So they believe that Ashurbanipal could read and write. So a very cultured individual. There's pictures of the Royal Lion Room in the British Museum. You can see all of the reliefs on the walls as they would have been displayed in the palace in Nineveh. They call it the Royal Lion Room because many of these pictures depict the lion hunt. Here is the fighting of the Arabs on the camels, from which we showed that photograph earlier. And there's a number of camels here, as well as horses. Camels here, and horses up here and chariots, and it gives us a picture as to what things looked like at the time. Here we have the Memphis conquest with the ladders, the shields that were made from the reeds from the Tigris. Another ladder here as they scale the walls, climb up and attack. Now remember, these pictures are all done at one time, so you get a sense of the action all happening at once. You have down here a river with a fish, we have a horse, we have people carrying a jar there, storage jar, probably wine being carried, or plunder taken off. So it gives us a picture of what the Egyptian fortified city looked like, possibly Memphis. This particular relief is the Battle of Ulai between the Assyrians and the Elamite king. This is the inspecting booty and prisoners from Babylon, with Ashurbanipal in his chariot, folks beside him, his army. You see how beautifully decorated the horses were. All the pomp and circumstance as the king would be displayed. And here we have the Battle of Ulai, removing the tongues from them, the live flailing. So they were quite cruel, pulling their tongues out so they couldn't speak and skinning them alive. So cruelty was kind of unspeakable, but we have a picture of it here in the reliefs in the British Museum. I want to talk now about the royal lion hunt. And this seemed to be the sport of the kings, symbolic of the ruling monarch's duty to protect and fight for his people. And they're quite beautifully depicted, even though there's a lot of sort of, we would call it violence today. The lion there, of course, with the arrow in his forehead, attacking Ashurbanipal, and he's down here with his sword going through the stomach of the lion, killing him. So the lion would be released. They would keep them in cages, and then they would have a lion hunt. Here's a picture of them releasing the cage, and then they would release the dogs. Pictures of their dogs here. These are a special breed of dogs that are still in existence today. They're called the Assyrian Mastiff, or they have a number of other names. Here's one. Here's what they look like today. The technical name for them is Ashkare Malakalissi, and they're also known as the Turkish or Kurdish Mastiff, or the Kurdish Shepherd Dog. And they were used to shepherd sheep. They were used as guard dogs. They're also called the Anatolian Lion because they're the size of a lion. They're also called the Pashtar Dog, and they still breed them today. They're very friendly, contrary to their size. They're like the big mastiffs we have today. I had a friend of mine who had a mastiff, similar dog to this, and they were very gentle and beautiful dogs. They would use them to herd sheep, protect their homes, but they were also known to be quite fierce in that they could take down a lion. And that's why we have pictures of them in the reliefs. There's a society that still breeds them, Breeding Improvement Associate, the AKMID, also known as the Turkish Mastiff, Kurdish Mastiff. That's the oldest breed supposedly in the world, 3,500 years old in Anatolia. And the Sumerians from Central Asia brought them to Mesopotamia Basin, and the breed was used as a war dog 4,000 to 25,000 years ago during the time of the Assyrians. So we have pictures of on the reliefs that Ashurbanipal used during his lion hunt. Here he is, Ashurbanipal, with his bow and arrow and shooting at the lions, chasing them on his horse. There's another picture of another horse with his bow, different type of hat on, just has a small crown. Here is the larger relief. The bottom pane shows a lion with a lot of arrows in them. It shows Ashurbanipal spearing the lion down the mouth. It shows the lion here on the left actually clawing at the horse, attacking the horse. Here's the arrow in the head again with the him stabbing the lion in the stomach. Here he is stabbing one in the throat. Again, quick graphic. They didn't shy away. They didn't have any PG on things. Here's the larger photo of the image, the dagger and two spears. Here's another one with a couple of spears. Lion tries to attack. Here's another one of the lion and a spear. These are all on the reliefs in the palace. Here we have a lion full of arrows, and the bottom pane actually shows him keeled over and dead. There he is again, and then we have him dead. Another one with arrows all through him. One of the young lions full of arrows. This is in San Francisco. Anybody that's been in San Francisco, this is a statue of Ashurbanipal holding the lion in his arms and holding one of his tablets in his hand that he could read. A bronze statue, the Civil Center of San Francisco. Here we have the palace, the royal palace of Nineveh, of what it would have looked like. And in his palace, they had these reliefs displayed. So quite graphic, a picture back into their life and culture at the time, focused around Ashurbanipal. Any comments, George?
Well, I got a few comments. So it happens in the 7th century BC.
Yep.
What I thought was interesting is that you did mention the Elamites around 640 BC. Let's see.
They're down in Petra area.
Down Petra. You mentioned the word beyond the river in Israel. And to me, that's interesting because there was a time where I was trying to collect a coin for a museum, and it was a Persian coin. And on it, it said beyond the river. And that was a terminology for the folks down south on the other side. And in that coin, and it has a wall on it, like a city wall. You could say, one of the biblical numismatics terminology for coin expert, Mr. David Hendon, he said, he goes, the term beyond the river, and we look at Ezra and Nehemiah, he goes, I think those are supposed to represent the walls of Jerusalem. So here in a coin, I think it's the only depiction of course, it's an artist's reconstruction on a coin, and then was the walls of Jerusalem. I thought that was kind of cool.
And George,
Yeah.
what would you say would be the river that's being referred to there beyond the river? Is it the
Oh,
Tigris,
maybe.
Euphrates,
Yeah.
Nile,
Yeah.
Jordan River?
Because they're like from the land of Mesopotamia, right? Meso, middle. And when you say hippopotamus means like water horse. So you hear that in Mesopotamia, the land between the two rivers. So here they are in between the two rivers, describing the land across the river to the south as beyond the river. We actually read that terminology, of course, in the biblical narrative as well.
So
I thought that was interesting that you brought that up.
People need to understand that in that reference, we're not talking about the Jordan River. We're talking
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Not
that could be
Jordan River.
confusing. Or the Nile River.
Or the
So,
Nile. Although you did talk about
Egypt.
the Nubians,
Yeah.
And I think people, when they think of Egypt, we lose it. We get all Hollywood, and we kind of forget that Egypt is North Africa. It's in Africa.
Yes.
And the terminology, in Egyptian, the terminology of Nub means gold. And Nubia is where the Egyptians would actually go and get their gold. And there was a time, I think this is actually referred to in the Egyptologist book, Reliability of the Old Testament, Kenneth Kitchen. He said there was a time where gold was more plenteous in Egypt than silver.
Yes.
Silver was actually rarer than gold. So many people don't realize that. I think that's interesting. Another thing is that that you mentioned that the Assyrian king, Ashurbanipal, in the biblical text, noted that Egypt is not a good ally. Don't look to Egypt as an ally. But his father, Hezekiah, did have Egypt as an ally. And I think, and once again, we'll bring this up. We see that in the, you can see a little bit where the seal would be in what we call Lamelech candles, meaning the king. Melech meaning king. So Lamelech, the king. And a lot of, you could say, archaeologists and scholars designate the time period of these Lamelech candles to that of King Hezekiah. But what do we see on the Lamelech candles? So maybe a scribe representing the authority of the king would stamp these handles, and it would have on it a symbol, and then the Hebrew word in Paleo Hebrew for king, meaning Melech. And
Yes.
then it would have a location it was designated to, like Lachish or Gezer. I think there's 4 or 5 different locations that have been validated now on the Melech handle. But Hezekiah did have an alliance with Egypt. And on Hezekiah's seal, we call him a bulleye, a clay seal. We can show that as well. And also on the Lamelech candles, we see an icon of Egypt, like a winged scarab, do we not?
Yes.
Kind of, in a way, it validates the alliance that Hezekiah had with Egypt at that time. Of course, you talked about that last week, so we don't need to go into that, where the Syrian king Sennacherib left. He had Hezekiah trapped like a bird in a cage, and then he had to go back home. So Jerusalem was laid siege, but it was not conquered. It continued. But it's at that time where we find these Lamelech candles in archaeological digs. I believe there's over 2,000. So they're still kind of rare, but they're well known. And I think we might have 5, maybe a little bit more, maybe 5 of those bulleye seals. They were once attached to papyrus documents, and they were stored in an archive with other documents. But when in time, when the building is probably burned or destroyed, of course, the papyrus is gone because of the fire and the heat. But the clay is like the seal that was attached to the papyrus scroll was preserved by the heat because it bakes it hard. And they have found these seals of Hezekiah in a number of different excavations. So they've been found actually in the antiquity market. So they're not what we call in situ. That makes them questionable, all right, for their authenticity. However, they have been found in archaeological digs in situ, what makes it 100% genuine without question.
Elliot Mazar found one in Jerusalem with Hezekiah's name on it, and it was almost identical to the ones that were found in the antiquities market. So it seems to indicate that the ones in the antiquity market are legitimate, because how would they have known what they would have looked like to recreate them if they weren't genuine? So
yeah, you're
also
right.
Similarities of the winged scarab, and it has
Right.
Kai on it. So yeah, good point. So
So
we've tied it all together, all the archaeology and the Assyrian kings, and shown how things have progressed through the reign and the rule of the Assyrians. And we'll take this, I think next time we'll take it into maybe we looked at the Persian Empire. We'll now go into the Babylonian Empire, and we can talk about the Babylonian kings rise up and suppress the Assyrians. And it kind of takes us through the chronology of the Old Testament even further.
It's very interesting podcast today. I appreciate it. I found it fun to listen to that. The idea of the lion hunts, that's kind of cool. You don't really think of lions today, of that part of the world.
The most dangerous
But
hunt we have today is the fox hunt, I think, in the UK.
oh
With the dogs, the fox and the hounds. But
yeah, really. And the dog that you showed us, that's a pretty good sized dog.
Folks can take and Google that. It was fascinating for me to kind of look at that. I thought to myself, they must still have those dogs around, or what kind of a dog was that on the Assyrian relief? And sure enough, actually somebody had posted on Facebook today those two pictures of those dogs in the relief in my archaeology group that I belong to, and talked about that a little bit. So that they must be peeking over my shoulder when I'm doing these podcasts, because they keep coming up with the same things I'm dealing with every day. But yeah, to see these dogs was quite something. They're quite large, and they showed, there was one picture out there that had a picture of a lion and one of these dogs beside it, and they're the same size. So amazing how big they were.
Oh, you know something else that's interesting is that you actually had camels with horses
Yes.
in those. I'll say in those a mural of frieze, and how in some of them they look very, very similar to the mural of Lachish's conquest, the brutality
Yeah.
and the siege.
Yeah.
Very similar. And but I
And for
thought it was
some-
very interesting that you had a camel. This was 7th century, wasn't it? That's 7th
Yeah,
century.
7th century. Yeah.
I did have an archaeologist on the program this year, and he was from the viewpoint, the critical viewpoint, which it's fun to show both points. It's only fair to show.
Sure.
And we were talking about the biblical patriarchs, and it was his PowerPoint, it's his lecture. And in the scriptural narrative, it does mention camels with Abraham, and it became noticeable that he had, like you're saying, a question on were there camels during the time period of Abraham, like you're saying, domesticated at certain time periods, which I think was also referred to in Kenneth Kitchen's book as well, domestication of camels.
We can't go back and put a particular date on the day when they domesticated it. That's not recorded, but there's certainly evidence that they were using them very early in history, and they were much more sophisticated than we might think.
I'm wondering what they bred the dogs with to get a dog that big.
Yeah.
Did you breed a dog with a lion?
Probably with a bear.
Yeah, a bear, yeah. So that's one huge dog.
Well, George, have you ever seen these mastiffs?
I probably have, but right now I can't bring it to what it looks like in my mind.
Well, they're both the size of a horse, and they're huge. I actually owned a Saint Bernard when I was a child. He would take me for a walk.
I bet he would. I bet you could, if he was, probably ride him.
They say that these dogs, the Assyrian shepherd dogs, these are related to the Saint Bernard and the Mastiffs. So they have this.
Oh, wow. I can see that.
Real thick hair. They had 2 layers. They had a thick undercoat, and they had a lot of fur around their necks, a bit like a lion, really, with a mane.
Right.
But and they came all in different colors. They had red ones and dark ones. You just didn't realize it was such a major significant breed and how large they were, and that it was a breed unto themselves. They have their own organization, and they still breed them today in Turkey, Kurdish people, and also in Iraq and Iran. So I just found that fascinating. As a dog lover, I have 2 German Shepherds. So
right, you do. You showed me a picture of your puppies.
Yeah.
One's a puppy, one's a big dog. I had a couple growing up too, German Shepherds. They were fun dogs.
Yeah.
So, okay, people, remember to like and subscribe. Help us out with that. More you hit that like button, give that like button a go at it. That helps the algorithms for what we're doing. I appreciate everybody subscribing. We're closing in on 157,000 subscribers at this time. We really appreciate that. We got a number of different things lined up for this coming year. And as we get things going, we're going to present them. So this is going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it. David, I really appreciate all the work that you have done this past year to bring us up to this level of subscription with all your PowerPoints and bringing other archaeologists on as well. I mean, we just talked to Dr. Craig Olson, was it not?
Yes.
And he has a book called How Old Was Father Abraham? Was that it?
Yeah.
I think it's very close. Father Abraham. But he deals with biblical dating, and he's agreed to be on the program once again. So we look forward to have him on the program. So a number of scholars lined up. So stick with us, and we're going to have a lot of fun. We got several museums lined up. Talk to Gary. We're going to go over there to the museum at Trinity Southwest University, and we're going to look at their artifacts from their latest excavation at Tel El Hammam, and he's
Great.
going to tell us all about that excavation through the artifacts that they uncovered. So everybody, you have a great day. David, you too have a great day. Appreciate your time, what you're doing. And also people, thanks for subscribing, and don't forget to like. Have a great day.